With the submarine submerged at zero bubble and a good trim, the bow planes were used normally for changing depth. That is, they could be put on rise or dive as required. The stern planes were generally used for changing the inclination of the ship, in other words, the bubble. It was normal to carry a zero bubble. The zero bubble referred to inclinometers at the diving station, so the diving officer could see whether the ship was level or not. There were usually two periscopes, one an attack scope and one with a larger eyepiece at the upper end of the periscope, which also contained an antenna for use with radar. In other words, making it available for taking a radar range through the periscope. The attack scope had a diameter roughly equivalent to a broomstick. This meant that the eyepiece at the upper end of the periscope was rather limited to its light gathering capabilities and was principally useful during clear weather during daytime. The bridge had very little operating equipment up there. It contained a base for the officer of the deck, the junior officer of the deck to stand, also provisions for sometimes guns like 50 caliber, 20 millimeter, 40 millimeter guns. It also was a very notable place for the periscope shears to support the periscopes. Most of our submarines were equipped with deck guns of sizes larger than the 40 millimeter guns. The deck gun was early in the war was a 3-inch 50 caliber AA gun. It was located forward on the ship, and then sometimes it was located aft on the ship. And then the 4-inch gun came to replace the 3-inch gun, and that could be located forward or aft. And then later on, a 5-inch gun was installed. The forward torpedo room serves two main functions. The first, of course, is to provide the space for the torpedoes and the torpedo tubes, normally 6 torpedo tubes mounted in the bow facing forward. Then spare torpedoes are placed in racks throughout the ship, throughout the compartment. Another function of the forward torpedo room is to provide berthing space for a portion of the crew, so that the bunks are arranged high above the torpedoes normally, but sometimes in between torpedoes, such that sometimes the bunks are sandwiched in between torpedoes. The forward battery compartment houses the officer's mess, commonly called the wardroom, the officer's quarters, and the chief petty officer's quarters. There are normally about 8 officers to a submarine, although the number has varied between 5 and 8. The wardroom is the center in which the officers eat their meals. It is served by the pantry in the forward battery compartment, which is adjacent to the wardroom. There are normally 6 to 8 officers aboard a submarine, including the commanding officer. The commanding officer's quarters normally contains 1 bunk and a safe and a desk. In addition, it has a gyro repeater in it that shows the course that the ship is steering. Outside of that is very sparse. For the officers, there are staterooms normally provided. The other officers share staterooms as available. The control room essentially contained all the controls for diving and surfacing the ship, steering, and the plane movements. There was a helm, diving station with the bow planes and the stern plane controls. There was the air manifolds, the high-pressure air manifold, the trim manifold for pumping water from forward trim to after trim, or however. Above the control room was the conning tower. The conning tower was actually a cylindrical section horizontally placed on top of the hull and attached directly to it with a hatch leading from the control room into the conning tower, and vice versa. In the conning tower were all the equipment necessary to direct in a submerged attack. For example, there was a wheel, there was the engine annunciators, there was the torpedo data computer, there was a chart table, there was the firing keys for the various tubes fore and aft, and other ancillary equipment. In the after end of the control room was a small space in which the radioman manned the radio. There were both receiving and transmitting equipment in there. Normally space for 2 radiomen. It was a rather crowded space, and all radio communications were conducted there. Messages were typed out on standard message forms, usually distributed as required. The crew's mess is located in the after battery, just aft of the galley. The galley prepares the food and serves it in at least 2 seatings of the crew, some of whom are on watch and are relieved to come back and eat their dinner or breakfast after the other section has gone on watch. Between meals, the area is used for ship's recreation. That is, they play checkers, pinochle, other games on the mess tables. Fleet boats were provided with electric ranges and electric ovens. The facilities were crowded but adequate for serving meals for up to 80 men. The galley contained electric range and electric ovens and dishwashing facilities for preparing the meals for the crew. After the crew's mess is the crew's quarters. The crew's quarters consists of bunks arranged in tiers, normally 2 or 3 high. Later in the war, because of the addition of crew members needed to man the additional equipment, such as sound equipment and radar, we put in 4 tiers of bunks. After the sleeping area was the crew's head, which included showers and water closets. There were 2 showers on most ships, and sometimes the ice cream machine was put back near the wash machines. The next compartment heading aft was the forward engine room. It contained 2 diesel engines. These were roughly capable of generating 1100 kW of electric power with their attached generators, direct current. There were 16-cylinder engines by and large, made by General Motors and by Fairbanks Morse. The engine room was fairly complete in itself and required a crew to operate the engines. A crew was normally stationed there, a 2-man crew. Immediately aft of the forward engine room was the after engine room, which is essentially a duplicate of the forward engine room with 2 diesel engines in it, and these also generated electric power, which was used to drive the motors that propelled the ship or to charge the batteries. The after torpedo room, like the forward torpedo room, provided the torpedoes and the torpedo tubes for firing at the enemy. There were spare torpedoes kept in the racks after all the tubes were loaded. Also, there were bunks for the crew. So there were 3 berthing spaces generally, the forward torpedo room, after torpedo room, and the after battery fitted with bunks.